All right, this video we're gonna go over drills to improve hip to shoulder separation. So what's hip to shoulder separation? At landing, that's when my hips are open and my shoulders are closed. Why is that important? Because when we use a kinetic chain, like a whip, if you look at a whip, to really make a whip work and crack and break the sound barrier, I've got to almost trick the whip. I gotta throw the end of the whip back as I drive the handle forward. Because what that does is when I throw the handle of the whip forward while the end's going back, it forces the end of the whip to hurry up and catch up. So it shortens the amount of time that the whip has to move forward. And that's what a counter movement is. So that's what hip to shoulder separation is. It's a counter movement. The hips are opening, shoulders are closing. And just like with a whip though, it's not enough just to create the counter movement, you know, or if you look at it, it's not enough just to spin it and do it in rotation. If I can do it with energy moving forward, I'm going to lengthen the kinetic chain. So when I do something just in rotation, so if I created a hip to shoulder separation counter movement and just in rotation, I'm gonna have a short path from when I build the energy in the ground to release. But if I do it with more linear energy, the rotational to linear energy, so I move my stride forward, I then counter by leading with the hips and keeping the trunk closed. And then that brings all that energy, then it enhances the energy going forward, like a whip being thrown forward, not just in rotation. That's gonna lengthen the kinetic chain with the counter movement. So the counter movement, if you're doing that well, doesn't really mean you're gonna throw hard, but if you're doing that with a lot of power and through a longer distance, like a longer stride, longer forward trunk, there's a really good chance you're gonna throw hard. So drills to help us do that. You know, ideally, we gotta look at it as what does the kinetic chain, my kinetic chain, your body, does it have the ability to get into these positions? So first you gotta get into the position. So get in a position where your feet are straight, your hips are open, and your shoulders are closed. Now, if you go to open your hip and you can't bring your trunk back, now we got some mobility issues. Or you got your trunk back and you can't get your hip around. We got some mobility issues, so we got to work on hip mobility. So here's some of the key stretches that will help with the hip mobility. Would be the couch stretch with your drive hip. I mean, obviously do both, but I'm going to just basically get here and I'm going to grab my foot and I'm going to stretch my quad, because this quad is creating a tight hip extension. That's going to limit my ability to push my hip around. So I got to work on that quad. I got to work on those hip flexors, okay, so I can stretch there. The other thing would be hip abduction. So like I'm doing a split, or I'm getting on a knees, super frogs, or I'm leaning on my back on the ground against the wall, doing a split. Let's work on the split, because the hip abduction is gonna have to help me build the momentum forward. And then I'm gonna go through the hip extension to push the hip through. So let's work on the hip abduction so I can get the linear energy into hip to shoulder separation or into the counter movement. The other thing would be, if I do all that really well and I hit front foot, now I'm gonna have this big forward trunk. Well, let's work on hip flexion, work on the hamstrings, the glutes. Let's do some of those stretches. So that would hit it well. Then from there, it's the thoracic rotation. All right, so let's work on trunk extension, trunk rotation. We can do different stretches that. Like with a monster band, you can get on your knees. You can take a monster band, wrap it around your shoulder. It'll pull your shoulder back as your hand is down, and then you'll just tuck it under, let it stretch you back, tuck it under, and always do this on both sides. Go back and forth on both sides, all right? And then there's other things you could do. You could lay with your feet across your body like this, a very common one, okay? And your arm down. You could put a weight on your leg and a weight on your shoulder, like I said, but do it both sides. Okay, those are all good stretches and stuff. You know, things to warm it up would be getting in the full stride and just picking up and driving as you bring your trunk back, you know, or we drive drills. You can even do it first with your feet straight, then with your feet lateral, like we do on the mount, where you're gonna have to drive and rotate and pull back, right? So I'm being a little tender on my front leg. I hurt my front knee the other day, overextended my front leg. But those little dry drills will help. The next would be going up a level would be the med balls. So what does a med ball do? The weight of the med ball is gonna hold you back more. So when you get in the linear drills, separated, shoulders closed, it's gonna help pull you back. So when you go to drive, this is gonna wanna be pulled back more, helping create more separation. Then you go into layback, and then you can drive your trunk through. So med balls, the way we throw them, like you're throwing with two hands, is a great way we do it. We actually call them med ball separation drills. That's in our programs. So med balls, 2-pound med balls are a great way to do it. You can do it with the heavier med balls, like 15 pounds, where you drive your hips open and you can separate and you throw it across your body. And that's just kind of like a core routine working on that counter movement. From there, you can do these with baseballs too. We can still get in those same drills. Feet straight, shoulders closed with the baseball, drive, pinch my scap, counter my trunk, cock my arm, and throw. If you have a hard time with that, that's why I invented the trunk accelerator, putting the trunk accelerator on. So if I put this on, all right, so this is how it works. Okay, I'm gonna put it on like this and like this. Kind of helps to have a partner, okay? Then you gotta tighten it up. So someone's gotta pull back there, and typically when you tighten it up, it's pretty high up like this. And then your arm is held in this slot. So this is loose, it's sliding off. You gotta get a partner to pull it, it helps. Now once you got that on, you're locked in here. Now what happens is, if I go to drive and my hips go to open and my trunk opens with it, I'll throw the ball across the zone. I'll either throw it either way. It'll go way that way or way that way, because your arm can't drag. It's forced to go with your trunk. So if your trunk goes early, your arm goes early and you miss way across your body. So what it does is it makes you sit back, counter rotate, delay the trunk even more as you drive the hip before you let it through, so you can get a more accurate throw, and your velo will be much higher when you do it right. So the trunk accelerator is really teaching you how to delay the trunk hip to shoulder separation. So that's another great device to do it. The stride accelerator, and we sell these two separately, or we sell them in the acceleration package. The stride accelerator is, what it does is it stabilizes us in a low stride or long stride, low center of mass position. I can go feet straight, I can go feet closed, right? And the cool thing is once I get in this position, I'm stable. So now I can separate. Not only that, I don't have to come out of this stable position. I can stay here, pick my front foot up and drive through it. That's why it rocks, and throw through it. Because a lot of times, the reason a lot of guys are struggling with hip to shoulder separation is because they don't have a good lower half. So you get them in these drills that I was showing you, and they go to pick up and their hips are unstable. They're all over the place, and then the arm's trying to you can't wait for the legs to stabilize and the hips open, so the arm's jumping ahead and you're not creating separation. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to fully push the hips around and open to where they lock down. The hip even stops into the front leg. That's why the front leg lands closed, so the hip can slam into it and squares you up. And you're doing that before your trunk initiates. Well, if I don't have stability and I don't have force going into front foot, pushing my hip through, locking it down into my front leg, then what's gonna happen, my arm's gonna have to go without it. And it's gonna have to use the glove, and it's gonna have to overcompensate and try to make up for the loss of energy. So really the key to hip to shoulder separation is the ability to use the lower half really well. Because at the end of the day, when you come set on the mound, your shoulder's already closed. The hips aren't open. And the problem is when we go to open the hips, sometimes they just don't open enough and our trunk goes early, or sometimes they open too slow and then our trunk goes early. So it's really the lower half has to get better. The trunk accelerator just puts in a position to where it forces the lower half to get better, because the upper half goes early, you don't even throw a good throw. So that way it's kind of like forcing you better fix the lower half. The stride accelerator is basically saying, here, let me help you fix the lower half so you see what it feels like when you go to throw. I've had guys on both devices jump up 5-10 miles an hour with the devices because of what they're forcing you to do. Stride accelerator helping you stabilize the lower half for better hip to shoulder separation. Trunk accelerator helping you or forcing you to make the lower half better, to make the upper half even work. So two great devices to improve hip to shoulder separation. The med balls always work. And a lot of you, like I said, the baseball drills, we're just working out of separation, so you feel it. And then the goal is we'll work it up to the mount, and eventually you want to pick up and be able to do the same thing. Get loaded, get drive, get hip rotation fast enough before the trunk wants to go so we can optimize that hip to shoulder separation. So you got all those tools and devices and mobility work, all that's in our programs as well. So you get that on the programs, or you can just get it individually in the training devices or collectively in the acceleration bundle. But all these things are really great for helping this really crucial concept. If you look at the studies, there's a lot of studies that show not just an improvement in performance when you improve hip to shoulder separation, but the other cool thing is an improvement in arm health. Because what happens is because you're delaying your trunk longer and you're separating, you're pushing more energy up, you're exponentially accelerating energy better. Therefore, your arm doesn't have to overcompensate and overwork. And that's where the arm, most people don't know, isn't a real driver of velocity, because you'll actually see lower arm speeds at higher levels of the game on average than you'll see at lower levels of the game. For example, there's a study that showed pro pitchers had lower arm speeds than college pitchers but threw harder. And that's because they're doing these things better. They're using the kinetic chain better. And that should be your goal, is the ability to use the kinetic chain better to get more energy out of it without the cost of using, of getting it out of your arm and overcompensating with your arm. So that's why it's such an important component. And I'd highly recommend you get good at it, you master it, especially if you want to be good at this game and be healthy. And then here's some tools to do it, and I hope those tools help. So if you have any questions, leave them below.